And welcome everybody to the AMA Boston Fireside Chat, again with Rob Volpe on keeping your brand human. And we are very, very excited to have you here tonight. So my name is Christina Inge. I am the AMA VP of Programming, and I have been on the board on and off since 2007. So 19 years. Took a hiatus for take care of family, and build my marketing agency, and am back and have seen a lot of marketing changes, as many of us have over those 20 years. And so I think one of the biggest changes that we are all seeing is AI, and that's why we're so excited to be here for our virtual fireside chat with Rob Volpe, Lost in Translation: How to Keep Your Brand Human in the Age of AI. AMA Boston is New England's premier organization serving marketers. We serve marketers up and down New England, from Maine to Connecticut, even though some of those people are Yankees fans. And we are here for all marketers at all stages of their careers. We typically, during the quote school year, have three events a month: a virtual event like this, where you can learn from wherever you are around the world, an in-person educational event, and an in-person, what we call marketing mingle, which is a networking event, usually in a restaurant, for you to connect with other marketers. And so we encourage you to go to our website, amaboston.org, sign up, and check out the upcoming events. We're about to drop those events on the website as soon as spaces are confirmed. Also, if you have a space in the Boston area and you would like to host us for our educational programs, free tickets for all of your team if you offer space and host us, as well as being listed then as our event sponsor. So if you've got a conference room, a auditorium at your office, and you'd like to bring us to your office, we are more than happy to come out there if it's within reasonable distance from Boston. We have this summer some great summer outings that are coming out, so watch your emails for those as well. With that, I would love to introduce our speaker tonight, Rob Volpe, CEO and founder of Empathy Activist LLC. He's an astute observer of life and a master storyteller who brings empathy and compassion to the human experience. He's the author of the award-winning book, Tell Me More About That: Solving the Empathy Crisis One Conversation at a Time. Rob is also the founder of Ignite 360, an insights and marketing strategy firm. He's a thought leader with 30 years of experience and works with organizations of all sizes in all industries to implement customized training, coaching, and consulting programs that can help drive results through the strategic use of empathy in the workplace and life. And he's worked with clients from Amazon to Starbucks, General Mills, Abbott Labs, Microsoft, Ulta Beauty, Whole Foods, Pernod Richard, and Nestle. And he's a contributor to Entrepreneurs Leadership Network, a frequent and highly rated speaker on topics of leadership, communication, and collaboration, and has been quoted in Adweek, Mashable, Huffington Post, The Street, Hemispheres Magazine, and the Chicago Tribune. And he's been a regular contributor to the mid-morning lifestyle show Good Things Utah in Salt Lake City. He's a graduate of Syracuse's SI Newhouse School of Public Communications and lives in San Francisco with his husband and three cats, one of whom might be making a cameo tonight. We mean the cats, although the husband's also welcome. With that, thank you, Rob, for joining us.
Christina, thank you so much. The husband stepped out of the house, but the cats are still around. Domino, who was here, just jumped down, so we'll see. We'll see who else makes an appearance. But thank you. It's so great. Ooh, yay! Another Syracuse Newhouse person. Hi, Johnny. I'm class of '91. I guess I can start with that little bit of bio information. I'm Syracuse Newhouse, class of '91. I ended up with a television and radio film management major. But I was always interested in how to influence human behavior, understand it, and then how to influence it. And that kind of naturally led me into marketing and then marketing research and empathy is so critical to that. So that became part and parcel to the work that we were doing and helping our clients understand their consumers and make those connections so that they could create better products and services and grow their businesses.
Absolutely. And I think that we hear so much about empathy now as a buzzword, as a counterpoint to AI, right? That we keep hearing AI does not have empathy. And so what we as humans bring to the table is empathy. But that almost sounds like not necessarily negative, but it sounds like the only reason we need empathy is to prove that we are not a robot, like that little check mark, prove I'm not a robot. But you've been doing empathy work in marketing for decades now, long before we even thought about AI. And
Yeah.
so there's a really good reason why empathy is critical to marketing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what does empathy in marketing mean to you? And also, frankly, what we should understand as marketers beyond AI. Why is empathy the cornerstone of being a good marketer?
Yeah. If it's a great question. If you're going to market a product, a service to somebody, you have to understand what the need is of the person that you're trying to create a product, who you're going to be in service of. If you're going to try to sell something to someone, you need to understand what their needs are and how to connect with them and persuade them to do something. And that word understand is actually part of empathy. Empathy, if we were to ask the group, and I'm not a mind reader, I failed that at school. It's Syracuse and other places. Empathy is about understand. You're probably going to give me three different definitions if I were to ask you the definition of empathy. You're going to say, oh, it's feeling the feelings of somebody else, or it's understanding the point of view of someone else. Or you might say, oh, it's walking a mile in someone else's shoes as them. And all of those answers are correct. At its heart, empathy is about understanding. It's about connecting to somebody so that you can do all the things that you might do. I often talk about, and we'll talk about it here. Empathy enhances the skills that we use to be the people that we are and the people that we hope to become. So, like when you have empathy, it makes you better at communication, at problem solving, persuasion, decision making, which makes you a better leader, team member, individual contributor. And that makes you a better marketer ultimately. So when you're understanding who it is that you're marketing to, what makes them tick, it's going to enable you to create better advertising. It's going to help you create a better product. It's going to help you with sell-in to whomever is distributing or selling your product. And empathy sits at the base of all of that.
It really truly does. It is about understanding what our customers want, our customers need, and but it's not just about, oh, understand in the abstract what it is that our customers want and need. It's also about being able to then communicate that we understand what you want and what you need. So, do you have any examples that stand out to you of organizations that maybe struggled with empathy or underestimated its importance or just honestly hadn't done the work to empathize with their customers and then either through their work with you or in some other way, they ended up being able to make a new or better connection with their customers and see some kind of impressive results from that.
Yeah, so I'll talk about some of the classic examples that are out there from the last few years. And since it's Pride Month, I will go to the two Pride related examples. So probably the biggest and one of the most costly was Anheuser-Busch and their tie-in that they did for Bud Light with Dylan Mulvaney, who's an actress and trans influencer. And Bud Light has been a supporter of the queer community for as long as I've been an adult. They've always shown up at Pride events and all the things. So it wasn't a surprise that they did that. But the surprise was the response from the cultural conservatives that didn't appreciate that and started a rather vocal protest that started to get attention far beyond what I think anybody at Anheuser-Busch was anticipating.
Mhm.
Eight ended up losing about $1 billion in sales. It lost its perch as the number one beer in the United States. And Modelo was kind of sitting there um, um, with a message that was resonating with that consumer that was boycotting Bud Light, and they won and they won a lot of that work, and they
Mhm.
became the leading beer in the United States. And Bud Light had to, and all of Anheuser-Busch, to their credit, really stepped back to take a look at, what did we get wrong with this particular thing and how do we move forward? And they developed an empathy program, which I did help them consult on, how they structured it, where they really have worked to make it part and parcel of the marketer's day-to-day life. So that they're listening to the consumers in different ways. They're having a deeper understanding of what the consumers want. And, in this case, it was that definition of what does it mean to be masculine? And what does masculinity look like in America in the mid 2020s? Um, and that's helped them, and they've had rebounds in sales, across parts of their portfolio. Bud Light is working its way back, but they've definitely learned from that. Another Pride-related example was Target a couple years ago.
Oh, Target.
I know. Target had two missteps, and one of them was a failure in empathetic communication, and that was more recent. That was last year's DEI when they changed their diversity program and the way that they announced it. If you really read the press release and the statements that they were making some shifts to it, but they weren't discarding it altogether. But what got picked up and covered was that Target was completely walking away from this, in particular as it related to partnerships with smaller Black-owned businesses based here in the United States.
Yeah.
And so boycotts got started. That was losing them $1 billion a month, I heard at one point. I think it was a month or a quarter. I think it was a month. They really had significant sales hits, lost their CEO ended up stepping out of that role. He's now still on the board and the chairman, but they brought in a new CEO who's working to right the ship and going back to the things that Target was always known for, which was that idea of discovery and finding the things that you just can't find in other places. So they have a ways to go. I don't think people have forgiven them. They also had then around the same time that Bud Light had their issue with the queer community, they also had put pride displays out, and again, more culturally conservative shoppers, guests at Target did not like that and were getting violent, knocking down some of the displays, threatening boycotts and protests, and again, big uproar. But Target, and again, communicate empathy in communication. When you're communicating empathetically, it's helping the other person, whether it's your consumers or it's colleagues or employees or customers. You're wanting them to feel like they've been seen and they've been heard and that you understand where they're coming from. It does not mean that you have to agree with them, but you have to help them feel supported. And Target took this sort of wishy-washy in the middle position that ended up leaving their guests not feeling satisfied, either the ones that were against the Pride displays or that were in support of it. The team members, the employees at the stores were getting threatened. There was video of some of them getting harassed, so they weren't feeling safe. They didn't feel the company was doing the right thing. And then the company pulled back on the Pride displays. And so now you have to like go online to find stuff, or maybe be in a store in San Francisco where it's just so obviously going to be available. Both of those are situations and issues where they didn't take the time to get to know and think about their customer. And when you are a mass brand like that, you've got so many constituents, and you do have to be thinking about how you have to understand them so that you can more effectively communicate with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it it just, and both of those situations were places where many of us may not agree with the people who were originating the controversy. And yet, it strikes me as interesting that you still help the brands empathize with all of the stakeholders, whether we agree with them or not. We want to understand what is driving them and how are they perceiving and understanding our brand. And that can be very challenging, right? It can be challenging to empathize with people who we don't necessarily agree with, whom we don't really necessarily understand. And that can be particularly challenging. I'm struck by something when you mentioned Target and their Pride things. This year they did a Pride like an ornament that is a clear reference to the movie Some Like It Hot. It's like the
Oh,
final car scene with
uh-huh.
like some kind of animals, and younger consumers are up in arms of like, what is this ridiculous car? What does this have to do with pride? And that made me laugh when I saw that like people were getting very controversial on TikTok about it because they lacked the cultural reference point of like what this was. And I'm like,
Right.
I gotta buy this Some Like It Hot collectible because that's one of my favorite movies. And that kind of made me think about how empathy is not just, I want to put myself in the shoes of the consumer when it is easy. Sometimes it's people we don't agree with. And sometimes, in other cases, we don't know what we don't know. As a Gen Xer, I literally had no idea there are people on earth who have not seen that movie. And so there's elements of empathy that are challenging. Sometimes
Yes.
it's because we don't really want to empathize with this person. Other times it's because we think we're empathizing, but we've got our blinders on because of cultural or generational differences. And you have a framework for this, right? You have your 5 steps to empathy. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about what are those 5 steps? How are they implemented? And how can we start using those steps in our own work as marketers?
Absolutely. So, um, I'll take us back in time. It was probably 2012, and had done some work on Greek yogurt. And what was, because that was the hot thing. Chobani was exploding onto the scene. Faye was getting really popular, and that became difficult for Dannon and Yoplait, who were the two leading brands. And so we were doing a lot of work with Yoplait, which was owned by General Mills at the time, and they wanted to understand like why are people eating Greek yogurt? Why are they paying so much for this Greek yogurt, and how can they compete? So we went out, they spent a nice amount of money with us. We went out, did a lot of qualitative in-home interviews and shop-alongs, and came back and told the story. And the business unit director was sitting in the presentation, and we finished, and he's like, I don't understand why somebody would spend more than $1 for a cup of yogurt. And it was like, well, but we just told you like the 10 things that sum up to why they're wanting to do that. And it was just like, ah. But at the time, I looked at it as like, well, his judgment was getting in the way. He could not get over that barrier that somebody would make a choice to spend more than $1 for a cup of yogurt. And it was preventing him from understanding what was happening with the consumer in the marketplace at that time, which then hinders his ability to make the right decisions or fight the fight for Yoplait to figure out how to, stay relevant in the market. And, if you go into the supermarket today, I mean, Yoplait used to have 10 feet of shelf space and top to bottom, and it's now much, much smaller. And Chobani has that sort of 10 foot space. So it was experiences like that that got us curious, like what's going on? Because I always want my work to have an impact. I want people to be able to do something with it. And so we're like, what's happening here that the clients aren't able to make the connection with the consumer? And so we started paying attention to what was going on, not only with the clients, but also with us as we were interviewing strangers, going into strangers' homes, and through our day-to-day life, we got curious about the social science and the research that was out there about empathy. Took a look at that, consulted with some psychologists, and identified the 5 steps to empathy. And so these are the steps to help you overcome the barriers. And that's what becomes the backbone of my book, which I'll hold up now. Um, um, so yeah, in my book, I go through all the 5 steps, but I use my stories going into strangers' homes, the times I got challenged as it relates to each of those steps, to bring those things to life because how we learn is through storytelling. And I didn't want to just wag my finger and say, oh, you must do this, but talk to people and share the experiences that I've had and the times that I've been challenged. And so you asked about those 5 steps. So the first one is dismantling our judgment. And that's the biggest one. In the subsequent research that we've done, we found this is the one that's hardest for most people. And particularly when you think about people that are highly educated, that are in the workplace, we are trained to have an opinion and to stand by it and to defend it, which then closes you off to other points of view and perspective. And so, dismantling your judgment is about those times that you're being judgmental, where you're rejecting somebody else's existence, thoughts, feelings out of hand. So being, casting aspersion, being negative about that person. And the second step is to ask good questions because you've got to be curious and you've got to ask good, open, exploratory questions rather than leading questions that might affirm your worldview. When you're asking those open questions, you're going to learn so much more about how somebody really thinks or feels. The third step is to actively listen. We think that we're listening, but in this age of technology and screens and productivity drives, we have so much going on in our heads that we have to really double check and make sure, oh, am I focused? Am I listening to you? Am I paying attention?
Yes.
Fourth step, integrate into understanding. And this is making room in your head that there's different ways of viewing the world and being okay with that and being curious about, well, what's going on. So that example I gave about Yoplait and spending more than $1 for a cup of yogurt, there was a combination of judgment that was happening, but it was also about integrating into understanding. He could not make room in his head that, oh, there's different ways of viewing the world. That for some people, yes, I would spend more than $1 for a cup of yogurt. Let me get curious about that. Let me ask questions and understand why that person feels that way. And finally, the fifth step is use solution imagination. So, this is where you're taking what you're hearing and sensing and trying to turn it into the next question, statement, action in order to reach a positive outcome. So, it's at the beginning of actually having empathy and expressing that, but it's with the purpose of moving things, keeping things moving forward.
And that can be the most challenging part, right? Because it's one thing to understand theoretically what's going on in a consumer's mind, or right, what's going on in somebody else's mind, but then moving from there to then how do we, as a brand, as an organization, use this information, use this knowledge to solve something for the consumer, whether that is producing a solution that works for everybody, creating a new product, creating a new service, or innovating a new product or service. That I think can become where we we become hesitant or things just fall apart, right? And I think that's the case with every form of market. I hesitate to call what you do market research, although I know you have a market research firm, but I think it's it's where so much of understanding our industry or our market falls down, that we get it, we understand to the extent that maybe we've had an aha moment, and now we get that, people will spend more than $1 per cup on yogurt. Aha, I've had my aha moment. And then that information goes up onto a shelf
Yeah.
alongside all of the other insights that we have had that could help us serve our customers better. So I'd like to poke a little on that idea of using your solution imagination, um, and ask, what does that look like in practice? How do you move from I get where you're coming from to I have now got a solution for you, without falling back into our own perspective of like, oh, I get it. You're willing to spend more money on yogurt. Here, let me solve that problem for you with a coupon or something like that, where we then go back into solving things from our own perspective. How do we keep that empathy when we go into solution mode?
Yeah. So, um, empathy is one data point in all the decision making that we're doing. So if you're a marketer, you need to have empathy. Let's say it is that, are we going to drop a coupon and do a promotional campaign? You've got, okay, I understand the consumer is looking for value, and we can provide that discount. But you also need to think about how the business, like, do you have the budget for that? What are the business needs? What's the need of your retailer that's going to be selling that? And so empathy is one piece of the pie in that sort of decision making. That said, and this is where companies struggle. And I have a tip for companies, but you need to keep the consumer front and center in your business and in your decision making. And so the ways to do that are to connect, make real live human connections. You don't have to spend $100,000 or more and go out and do deep stuff. There's some really quick connection tips or practices that you can have. But then also think about in your own organization, how can you keep the consumer present? I know classically, Amazon typically has an empty chair in all of their meetings, and that chair is supposed to represent the consumer. I've seen other companies that will decorate the halls and the meeting rooms with pictures of actual consumers or respondents that they've met with quotable quotes that give meaning, and it just helps everybody remember who it is that we're serving and why we're doing what we're doing. On a practical level, when you're in action, when you're in that moment, ideally, and this is when if you have the chance to do a segmentation or you know who your consumers really are, you can think about who that individual is. If you can get it down to a persona or a real person, you can start to keep that person in mind when you're making your decisions. During one workshop I gave, when I was asking the question, the definition of empathy, somebody said it's empathy is having a tiny version of the other person inside my head that I can ask, how would that person feel about this thing that I'm going to say or do? That's empathy. And I thought, well, yeah, practically that is what it is. It is having that other person. And so if you can do that with your consumer or your customer, if you're needing to, if your efforts are focused on driving distribution, you need to be thinking about your customer. Whoever that person is, you want to try to internalize it.
Absolutely. And always keep them front and center. And you mentioned all of the different needs of the different stakeholders, right? It's for instance, you are want to empathize with your consumers, but at the same time, you also need to empathize with your retailers, right? If you're
Yeah.
adjusting your prices, that could end up being a situation where you end up then needing to um, you're hitting your retailers because you're trying to help your consumers. So I would question then becomes, it sounds like empathy can be very complex, right? It can turn into you have multiple, I would say, people who are competing for your empathy, right? In other words, they are competing for you to be helping them. And those can be areas where helping the retailer means keeping prices high, helping the consumer means keeping prices low or doing a discount program. And so you then have to decide. Maybe it's, I'm going to have to decide who gets more empathy in this particular situation and who gets more empathy in that situation. How do you balance the needs of the different stakeholders that you're empathizing with? And then also, obviously, empathy for yourself as a company. You need to keep the lights on. You need to be able to have work-life balance for your employees.
Yeah.
How do you figure out who do you empathize with when everybody is looking for a piece of the empathy action?
Well, and you're teeing up a great point, which is that having empathy with somebody does not mean that you agree with them or that you're
Yes.
going to make a decision that's going to go in their direction. Having empathy just means that you understand where they're coming from or how they might be feeling about it. And then you can use that empathy to communicate more effectively and say, I mean, it's a little hard to go to a retailer and say, "Hey, I know you want to take, you want to rise up the pricing, but we can't do that." But you can communicate that I understand your situation, and now let me explain where I'm coming from. And by doing that, you're hopefully getting to a place where you can collaborate on a compromise that might work for everybody. It's recognizing to the consumer, it's the, hey, I know. I was thinking about this earlier during the pandemic, when the pandemic first got going, and every ad was saying, in times like these.
Yes. Yes.
And yes, for 2 weeks we needed that, and then it started to become a joke because everybody was doing it. And so then, but it started out understanding, and that there was a reflection of empathy of like, we understand you're going through something right now, and we're here for you. That was a show of empathetic support in their communication. Um, but as you're thinking about it, like, okay, if I'm sitting in a business and I'm deciding if I need to take pricing, I mean, you've got to consider you go through all those business decisions. What's the impact on the consumer if I do this? How much volume are we going to lose if or how loyal are my customers or my consumers to me if I increase my pricing? Can they afford it? And that answer changes, like in this day and age, in this moment in time with gas prices elevated and inflate, people haven't rolled back prices from inflation still. So a lot of consumers are still struggling. And if you're fortunate enough to be in that, sort of somewhat rarefied air that a lot of marketers exist in, where they're making a good salary, you may not necessarily be connected to that and understand it. So you're balancing all of those things. You're making all of these decisions. You've got to consider all the different data points of information, and then it's about how you communicate to whatever the answer is. But you're wanting people to say, I often share what I call the formula for empathy is just to be able to have somebody else feel like you see them. Like I see you. I see you as a person. I see the context of your situation. I see what your day is like. I see see it through the context of my day as well. I see you. And if you can get that across, that's going to help any of those messages be better received.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sometimes people just want to feel that they've been heard. Obviously, it's going to vary. Some people, doesn't matter how much you acknowledge their perspective, they're going to want it their way or the highway. But some people, they're going to just feel more respected, feel more heard. It's
Yeah.
kind of like it goes back to how a lot of consumers now say they won't do business with a company that doesn't do personalization. It's not because they want creepy ads to follow them around the internet. It's because they want to know that the brands that they're doing business with know who they are, hear their perspective, and want to deliver an experience that acknowledges that perspective. And that's one example of how AI, for lack of a better term, and I do say for lack of a better term because machine learning, generative AI, all of these technologies are getting lumped into one big envelope called AI. But it's one area where AI, in this case machine learning, can really give people more empathy because it allows you to customize and personalize to every consumer so that they feel seen and heard. One of the things that this talk is meant to help us all with, and that's mentioned in the description, is tips to how to keep your brand human even when you're using AI. Because it's not about, oh, don't use AI. It's about how do you stay empathetic and human even when you're using AI. What are some examples of brands that are using AI, but they're keeping that empathy, they're keeping that connection to the consumer? Their consumers are feeling heard, and perhaps they're feeling like the brand promise is being delivered in a way that's very special to them. Who's doing this right?
Ooh, it's a good question. You don't, a lot of brands are using AI, but they're doing it behind the scenes. So I would say the brands that are doing it right are using AI as a partner, not as the lead or not taking the lead. I think the thing that I always talk to people about as it relates to AI in this moment right now is that AI exists on some other dimension. It is not down on this earth with all of us. And so AI does not fully understand what it means to be human, what our experiences are. It does not have emotion. Emotional intelligence is not programmed in. So it always comes off a little false if you're letting AI lead. And that's where you need to partner with it so it can do some of the heavy lifting, but then you need to actually jump in and start to um, add your own human thought, your human creativity to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how how are you recommending that people do that partnership? How are you recommending if somebody's using AI, maybe they're even facing pressure to use AI because, the expectation of the higher productivity when you're using AI, they want to use AI, but they want to do it the right way. They want to use it as a partner and not a replacement. They want to make sure that they keep that empathy there. What are some tips for doing that?
You know, again, it kind of depends on where you're sitting in the organization, but I know some clients that are using AI to ingest massive amounts of data that they would never have been able to have analyzed themselves. And
Mhm.
it's able to look at everything, but you have to be querying it and continuing to kind of poke and prod and make sure that make sure the things that it's saying are actually grounded in reality. I was just at lunch talking to somebody. I was like, AI is kind of miraculous because it's talking back to us, and you kind of think, oh, it's like a human, and it just spits out all of this content so quickly that you get there's a bit of an awe that happens with it, and you're astonished that it's able to do it, and you're like, "This is great. I'm going to go to the boss." But then it gets back into, well, yeah, it's not all kind of grounded in reality, and you need to take the time to look at it. So where I see clients doing things well with AI is again. Uh, Connecting dots, like ingesting large amounts of information and finding patterns in that information that didn't exist or that they had never seen before. That can be
Right.
really helpful strategically. I hear stories about, and I know the Cannes Lions event is going on right now, or just wrapped up over in France, and it's AI is getting used in storyboarding. It's getting used in the initial sort of creative development process. It's not
Mhm.
being the creative, but it's helping the creative. So it's looking at what are the different ways and tools that you can partner with AI without letting AI be the dominant, because we ultimately are still humans and we can see when something isn't landing as quite true.
Absolutely. And I see that so often. I'll see people AI generate an entire campaign And there's a real disconnect there because you'll prompt it to develop personas, and then it'll go ahead and develop a persona that on the surface looks perfect, right? It's got the persona's pain points. And then none of that translates into the next step, and the next step of then addressing those pain points in your marketing copy. So, for instance, like if somebody's pain point is, I want more protein in my yogurt, but then you'll generate an ad that will say, our yogurt is on sale and it's cheap. And that was not the persona's pain point at all. And
Right. And
it, but it looks so slick.
it's unbelievable what it did. That person looks real. Yeah,
Yes. And it
totally.
looks so polished. AI can look so polished. It can look so slick.
Yeah.
And it just absolutely looks absolutely perfection. And it looks normal and it looks usable, but it doesn't have any real empathy. It's just a superficial, slick message. And I think that with AI, a huge disconnect is happening because it used to be that if something looked polished, it looked good, it had a smiling person in it, the copy flowed well, it had a nice slogan, it just, it led to a beautiful landing page, and the whole thing had a polish to it. Usually that stood on a grounding of a lot of research, of a lot of focus groups or customer discovery interviews or other empathy driving mechanisms. And you got to the polished part only after you had done a fair amount of research. And often the organizations that were putting out unpolished marketing were often the same ones that didn't really understand their customers. Now, thanks to AI, you can create gorgeous, gorgeous looking marketing materials that look like they come from a, $50 million campaign that absolutely would have had some solid research behind it. And yet there's nothing behind it. And it can get signed off on, it can look absolutely plausible and be completely disconnected. And I think that's where people are not yet on the alert for looking at it just because it looks like it's grounded in something a consumer would want because it sounds empathetic. It's miming empathy. Doesn't mean that no consumers were empathized with in the creation of this campaign. Um, how do
And
we as how do we look out for that kind of thing in our AI work?
so, well, Christina, you're familiar with the uncanny valley, I would imagine.
Yes,
Yes. So
exactly.
the uncanny valley is this concept. It came out of robotics back in the, I think, early 70s. I forget the gentleman's name in Japan who's an expert in robotics. And it was this idea, and you see it happen in movies in particular, but it's when something looks kind of human but isn't quite. So in robotics, when you see a very boxy sort of robot, you recognize that's a robot. But then when you get into a humanoid, that's when it enters into the uncanny valley where it gets creepy.
Mhm.
Zombies are, so if anyone's a Walking Dead fan or any other zombie movie, zombies fit in the uncanny valley because they look human, but they're not quite moving human, or they've got, some distortion, and that's uncanny valley. We experienced the uncanny valley as a society during the pandemic, during lockdown. I remember, the empty streets, seeing the freeways completely empty at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and your brain is just going, but it's Tuesday. I'm supposed to normally see traffic going there, or it was
Yes.
really quiet. That's all uncanny valley. It's things that look like what we recognize, but are not. They are actually unfamiliar. And so AI can do that really well. Coca-Cola did a campaign. They tried to reimagine some of their holiday campaigns and they used AI to generate.
Yes.
And it was like, not totally sure. And it continues. I saw something this morning on Instagram where it was a supposed Shark Tank video for this men's skincare product because hi, Instagram knows I'm in my late 50s and therefore might be interested in some, younger looking skin. And there's this men's product that's made out of beef tallow because apparently I know, I know. But apparently it's bioidentical to the sebum in our skin or something. But the guy that's supposedly presenting the pitch is claiming to be 73, but he looks like 43.
Oh
And the
no.
judges are all like, no way, no way. And he's, oh yeah, no, 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 I've used this product. And so I forwarded it to my husband and then to a friend of mine who I know is into skincare. And he was like, oh yeah, I make stuff like this. So I'm like, okay, there's some legitimacy. But my husband was like, this is AI. And I haven't had a chance to look at it. But again, there's that seed of doubt. So they're using AI to generate this. And I think if you're going to do that, if you're going to do an animated, AI generated animated ad, don't go for realism, go for something that looks animated. Like, so people know, okay, I'm watching and I can be entertained by it, but don't go all the way through. I think the other tip for people in your marketing as you think about AI, if you want to have things that are consumer customer facing, like what is it that you're doing? How might the consumer interact with you and how could AI enhance it? I know L'Oreal had created the different face sort of you can try on different looks, and it's been pretty popular for them. And that was utilizing a form of AI to make that happen. So there's different ways to do it, but you got to think about how, like, what's true and right for your brand and your business, and how AI could aid in that.
Absolutely. Don't try to hide the fact that it's AI. I think I like the animated things, especially because you can do something fun, you can do something creative. And it people aren't expecting it to be real. And like you said, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's that uncanny valley. It's that creeped out feeling we're going to get when we see something that um that looks almost but not quite human. And there's a bunch of theories as to why we feel that way. One being that it kept early cave people safe from other species of humanoids who
Ah,
wanted to
yeah.
eat us. So we get very scared. We get very afraid when we're around something uncanny. And you can have the uncanny valley with text or content, right? Is that also the case that something can feel uncanny because it reads like a human wrote it, but not quite?
Yeah, well, and I think that's sorry, there's some cat hair that's on my desk.
That's okay.
And since we're having a fireside chat, I feel comfortable in just putting that in the trash can.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, well, it's that soullessness that AI, when AI generates copy for you, whether it's your own personal emails or something else, I find that it has a little soulless. So there's a little uncanny valley nature to it where you're like, and it's not just the M dashes. There's just something in the word choice. And what I would remind people of, and this is actually, and Christina, I'd actually love your perspective on this. But when I think about the LLMs, which is the basis of a lot of the AI that we're using, it's predicting the next most likely word based on all the words that have come before that it's been trained on.
Yes.
The other way to describe that is it's coming up with the lowest common denominator,
Mm-hmm.
which
Really is.
is usually not what we're looking for when we're trying to strive to for greatness, and we want to make our brand stand out. Oh no, let me find the thing that's going to appeal to like everybody, but be special to no one. So that I think is another part of the challenge with AI at this point.
It really is. It will give you the same messaging as everybody else has. which is not only not going to make your consumers feel like they're being heard and seen because you're literally just coming up to them like a bot saying, our and I got tons of products. Our coffee mugs are the largest coffee mugs on the market because you like hot coffee, like robotic sounding, which is going to not be good because it's again the same message everybody else has. But also, the whole point of marketing is to differentiate your product, right? You do not want to have that, devil wears Prada immortal moment like pastels for spring, revolutionary. You don't want to be just like everybody else, cookie cutter, because then why should people buy from you and not from the people down the street who are more familiar or cheaper or have some edge over you? You want your product to stand out, and AI is going to do the opposite of that with your copy, with your positioning, with your messaging. It's literally going to sound exactly like everybody else. So you aren't going to have that competitive edge by being unique. And again, I'm a huge believer in AI. I developed and teach Harvard's AI in marketing micro certificate. I am not an AI skeptic. I teach people how to use AI in marketing. And the first thing you need to do is make sure that your inputs are human and that you are reviewing everything to be on brand and to be aligned with the human side of your with your brand and to be humanized on both ends of the production chain from input to final quality control and publishing it. But it's not about don't use AI. It's about think about how I can use AI as an accelerant to my creative process, not a replacement for it.
Yeah.
And that's also part of empathy because does anyone want to read AI slop? No. It's empathize with your consumers also by not giving them stuff that's just been pushed out through AI without any human input because nobody's got time for that.
Yeah, and that's the thing. People get hung up on what I call the old tapes that are playing in our heads that have been programmed into us from so many different forms. But empathy is not a weakness, it is not a flaw, it is a feature of being human. It's built into all of us. We all have the ability to have it. And so it's a superpower if you choose to pay attention to it and learn how to utilize it properly.
Absolutely. It is the key way to meet our consumers where they are because they need to know that we get them and that we care about them and that we care about giving them the products or services that they need. Um, this has been a fantastic conversation. I've really, really enjoyed that. I want to open it up now to Q&A, but before we do that, any thoughts, anything we haven't covered that you think is super important for us to address before we open it up to Q&A about empathy and reaching our consumers where they are?
Um, I would say, what I see happening right now, we've got two different directions that we're running in. We are running faster, but we're still having this desire for depth, for the human connection.
Yes,
And are they mutually exclusive? Maybe kinda. They can be related to each other, but you've got to take the time to get to know your consumer. No matter how fast you're trying to go, if you don't understand who your consumer is, if you're aiming for the North Star and you don't know the consumer, you're going to be off by degrees. And the less you know about your consumer, or the more you ignore them, the further away you're going to be. And so you will end up 90 degrees away from where you should be and where success lies if you don't take the time to get to know your consumers.
absolutely. Absolutely. And now more than ever.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Studies have found large brands miss out in the US on up to $500 million in sales because they're not including empathy in all the different touch points of their marketing, their customer experience. all those different areas. And that's a lot of money. And it's not lost consumers, it's just consumers that aren't considering them because they don't feel that empathetic connection.
Absolutely. And then they're going to go buy from somebody else who does give them that empathy, or possibly opt out and not buy and not participate in that particular market because they don't feel that anything is meeting their needs, and they're nobody's making them a priority and seeing things from their perspective. Rob Volpe, this has been a great conversation. I want to give our audience a chance to ask their questions. So if you have any questions for Rob, if you have anything that you want to know about empathy, the 5 steps of empathy, or how to empathize better with your consumers in the age of AI, the floor is yours.
And I see Steve has a question about where the 500 million came from, and I can tell you that.
Okay.
1 second, let me pull it up. That is, so Steve, that is actually from M&C Saatchi, the advertising agency, their Clear Strategy division. It's a 2018 study looking at the experience gap. It's a global study, and they were looking at leading brands around the world based in different countries and estimating the revenue that was lost by them.
So, well, that's eye-opening. If they're, we often think of empathy as this warm and squishy thing, but that's a significant number that really speaks to the need for empathy.
I mean, the data is so overwhelming to why empathy is important. 9 out of 10 consumers value empathy as a key driver of loyalty. 97% consider it the most important part of customer experience or customer service is having empathy. And when you think about yourself, the times when you have had a bad customer service experience, maybe, your flight was delayed or they screwed up your coffee order. Empathy is, it's about how they communicate back to you. Are they even just able to say, I'm sorry that this happened, or I can see that this is really frustrating for you. Let me make you a new coffee, or let me get you a hotel and get you on the next flight in the morning. The way that they handle that and approach it makes a huge difference. It's part of why Delta and United both have made huge investments in training in customer service, and empathy is a key part of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This has been that's very eye-opening, and thank you for sharing that. A question coming in from Ashma: what safeguards are needed to ensure empathy does not become inconsistency or unfairness in making decisions? Fantastic question, Ashma.
It is a good question. Let's see if I can interpret this. So, safeguards are needed to ensure empathy does not become inconsistency or unfairness. So, that your bias doesn't get in the way, perhaps. AI can actually help you with AI can look at things from a very unbiased perspective. But empathy, people worry about empathy kind of taking over. And I guess there are people, about 25% of the population identifies as a highly sensitive person or an empath. And for those individuals, their empathy skills, like their superpower is turned on, but they can sometimes let that lead their decision making. And so, what you always want is that balance of the empathy with the rational thinking and decision making. And so that's where, the need of the consumer and having empathy with the consumer is only one part of your decision making. It would be the same way with your employees as well. You need to consider that, but also consider the needs of the business. So you want to make sure that you're keeping all of those things in alignment and in balance. I think when it comes to the highly sensitive person, um, it's understanding that you're not trying to take everything on. An analogy that I use is if you're making pasta You've got the water boiling, the pasta's going in the pot. When it's done, you're pouring that into not another pot, you're pouring it into a colander because you want to keep the things that are important, but you want to let the rest of it drain away. That excess energy, the excess feelings that you're holding on to. And that takes some awareness and doing to make sure that you're not carrying the things that aren't going to serve you. And then ask yourself, I think if you're concerned that maybe you are being unfair, have some self-awareness, step back and look at it and say, what are the factors that are going into this? Am I being, is this inconsistent to something else, company policy, past practices? Is this unfair for a certain reason? And if you can look at that objectively, if you can ask a colleague or somebody to give you unbiased feedback on that, that can also be helpful. And I hope that's answering the question.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Right. Any question coming in from Steve? Do you ever find friction or tension re empathy when your audience is both B2B and B2C? Ooh, great question from Steve.
Sure, because I would imagine Walmart would have loved to have sold Yoplait for more than $1 a cup, which might be the B2B side of it, as that's the customer. And then the consumer has a different need. So again, you're having it's kind of that like two things can be true. You can have empathy with the consumer and understand. Because again, having empathy does not mean giving up your own point of view or your own perspective, but it's a data point that you're considering and balancing with others. So there's a lot of tension that comes up in all businesses, and it's that reality. It's the reality of what the business needs, what the customer needs, and so the B2B, and then what the consumer needs. And you're constantly playing that dance, if you would.
Absolutely. Like so much else in empathy, it's about balance, constant balance and self-awareness. Absolutely.
Yes.
Any other questions for Steve out there in the group? All right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions there. But if people have questions later on to follow up with Steve, how can they get in touch with you? If you want them to get in touch with you.
They would like to follow up with me, Rob. They
Rob,
can visit my website, which is robvolpe.expert. They can also find me on the socials. So on LinkedIn, just look up Rob Volpe, tag empathy onto it, and I will definitely be the first one to pop up. You can also find me as Empathy Activist on Instagram. But off of my website, robvolpe.expert, you can reach out to me directly. You can set up time to talk to me if you'd like. You can sign up for my newsletter, Reading Between the Lines, and you can also learn about where to purchase my book. Tell me more about that, which is available in all the formats wherever you buy books.
absolutely. And thank you again so much, Rob Volpe, for this wonderfully empathetic conversation about empathy. This was very enlightening. Very much enjoyed this conversation with you. So, again, thanks to Rob Volpe for sharing his insights. Thank you to the audience for all of their great questions, including Steve. Um, and really, I think this was a very timely conversation. So this was very, again, enlightening and useful. If you are interested in continuing the conversation with AMA Boston, again, come to amaboston.org. You can see all of our membership opportunities, volunteer opportunities, as well as our upcoming events. And we hope to see you at some future events as well. And in the meantime, again, like I said, this meeting will be recorded. Rob, thank you so much for tonight's conversation.
Awesome, Christina. Thank you. It's been a
Thank you
pleasure.
all. Take care and have a lovely night.